Hello and welcome to episode 38 of the Motivational Millennial Podcast. Today we are speaking with Chandler Bolt, who I saw speak at an event not too long ago and thought, man, this guy has some serious wisdom for his early millennial years and invited him to be on the podcast. And a few months later, here we are. He has some great insights on leadership and growth and brings incredible energy to the conversation, in addition to some really touching personal moments too. So we hope you'll stick around after the interview for the after show where Ivy and I share our biggest takeaways.
Woohoo! Welcome to the Motivational Millennial Podcast, where we talk with inspiring members of the millennial generation who are living life with a sense of purpose and achieving their dreams. I'm Ivy LeClaire.
And I'm Blake Brandis.
Our motivational millennial guest today is Chandler Bolt. Chandler is the author of 6 best-selling books, including Book Launch and Published: The Proven Path from Blank Page to Published Author. He's also the founder and CEO of Self-Publishing School, the #1 online resource for writing your first book. Through his books, training videos, and Self-Publishing School, he's helped thousands of people on their journey to writing their first book. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me here.
And we're glad to have you, and we would love to know more about what you're up to and what you love about it.
Yeah, so I am currently building my company, Self-Publishing School. I guess it was almost 3 years ago. Man, that is crazy to think of. I dropped out of school and I've been building Self-Publishing School for just going on 2 years. And we've kind of basically what we do is it's an online training company. We teach people how to write, market, and publish their first book and how to use that book to grow their income and their business. So it's a labor of love. You know, obviously in the intro, you just mentioned I've published a few books of my own, and, you know, we've been able to teach thousands of people this process on how to do this themselves. So it's been really fun. We kind of grew it from nothing and went from 0 to 1.32 million in 11 months over 2015. And then we did about 2.2 last year and on pace to keep doubling pretty much every year. So just growing that and helping a lot of people with their books. And it's really exciting because I know that for me, a book was kind of what started everything. When I published my first book, that was kind of when everything changed. And so just to be able to provide that and help other people achieve that's really exciting.
It's so interesting. It's like you're giving people a voice or a way to share their story and why they love the work that they're doing. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Oh, it's fun to kind of see where people go with it.
Could you take us back to a couple moments? One, that first book, and also the decision to drop out of school, because I think those are really important turning points in your journey.
Oh, for sure. So the first book, I'll never forget it. So I had actually already dropped out of school. Oh, whoa, I was in the process of dropping out of school. Most people would say, well, what's the process? You just drop out, right? Well, I just decided, you know, I always wanted to study abroad. And so when I decided to drop out of school, I thought to myself, I was like, oh, man, I'm not going to get to study abroad. And I wanted to do this for a really long time. And then I just came up with the genius idea. I can study abroad and then drop out. And so kind of get to see Europe on the school's dime and have a lot of fun and then drop out. And it would be a time of introspection and figuring out what I want to do. So that's what I did. I decided to drop out. I was studying abroad, and that's when I released my first book. It's called The Productive Person. And I'll never forget, I was snowboarding with some friends, and the book had just released, and it was doing really well. It was doing far better than I had ever expected. I had pretty low expectations for the book. I just kind of put it out because I thought I could help some of my friends with some challenges they were dealing with. So I put it out there, and then, you know, the book really started to take off. And a friend we were on the ski lift snowboarding, and he said, hey, I heard your book's doing well, but books don't make any money, right? Is the book actually bringing in any money? And I thought for a second. And I said, well, you know what? We were snowboarding all day yesterday. And while we were snowboarding, the book brought in over $400. And it was as if, as I said that, as those words came out of my mouth, that I realized that this is passive income. This is that mystical thing that Robert Kiyosaki talked about, right? In his Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. And I read about it in high school. And I said, oh, well, I don't have enough money to buy real estate, so apparently passive income, I can't make it happen. It opened my eyes to the fact that it is possible. And so that book made close to $7,000 in the first month, and it made several thousands of dollars, month after month after month after month, and continued paying the bills while I dropped out of school and keeping my head above water. So that's kind of the moment of my first book. And then a moment of me deciding to drop out of school was over time. It really, the whole premise was I got tired of learning how to run a business from professors who had never ran a business. That really didn't make too much sense to me. So I had a friend who finally said, "Hey, Chandler, when are you going to drop out of school?" And it was actually somewhat of a mentor and someone I looked up to, and it really hit me, because I always told myself, "Oh, I'll drop out of school if and when I have enough knowledge and I've learned everything that I came here to learn, and I'll just go ahead and drop out." But for him to ask it in that way, it made me really question it. And so I thought about doubling down and finishing early, but that thought just almost made me throw up because it's like, that just sounded miserable. And so then I asked myself, well, if it's not worth finishing early, why is it worth finishing at all? And that's kind of when I came to the whole conclusion of, you know what, I'm learning a lot of things from running my own businesses outside of school and from mentors and from people who have been where I want to go. So at this point, I don't think it makes sense to continue learning from people who haven't done what I wanted to do. And a piece of paper is not going to give me a successful business. That's only going to happen by going out and working at it and from learning kind of in the field and from people who have done what I wanted to do. So that's what went into the whole decision for me to drop out of school.
I really admire the courage that takes to go against the grain. And hearing that, I am curious, were there some elements of your undergraduate experience when you were there that you have found to be valuable since, leaving and going and running your businesses full time?
Yeah, definitely. There were some valuable experiences. And it's one of those things where I look back and I actually think that 1 to 2 years of college is a really good experience for most people. At least it was for me. Now, there's a couple caveats. One being that you're in state, so you're not paying a ridiculous amount of tuition. If you're going out of state, you're paying $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year for a lot of schools, which is just insane. So don't go out of state and put yourself in a bunch of debt. I definitely don't recommend that. But if you go in state and if you go for 1 or 2 years, I think it can actually be beneficial for people. For a lot of people, I'd recommend a trade school because you learn a valuable trade and it can be valuable. I mean, obviously for certain people that want to be doctors or that want to be lawyers or certain professions where you have to have schooling, then yeah, by all means, you kind of got to follow the code. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, I don't really recommend going full time into business school because business school will teach you a decent amount on business, just enough to be dangerous. And I found in my personal experience that a lot of people who go to business school, they can tell you a million reasons why your business idea won't work because they've been to business school. Right. And it's almost like you overthink it. And a lot of people that go to business school, they couldn't see opportunity if it nailed them right between the eyes because they're schooled to go by the book. And, a lot of most business success isn't by the book. So it just kind of squelches a lot of opportunity. And then at the same time, it handcuffs you because you've got so much debt that once you get to the end of the road, it's like, well, now I have to get a job because I have to start paying off this debt. So I wouldn't recommend it for a lot of people, but I will say, to answer your question, there were some good lessons. I think it's great to be able to move away from home, to gain independence, to live on your own, to, just kind of mature a little bit and be out of the house. Because if you were to drop me into what I got dropped into when I dropped out of school, prior to me going to school, I don't think I could have handled it. It would have been way too much all at once. I failed for a solid year after I dropped out of school. And so if you were to put that failure combined with me being out of the house for the first time, with me, moving across the state, not being in my hometown, not having a bajillion friends, around me all the time like you have in high school, like all those things, the pressure would have been too much. So that's why I actually think that it can be beneficial to go for 1 year or 2 years.
You mentioned that sometimes the education makes people who have gone to business school do too much by the book and then keep them from being successful in that way. So I'm wondering, what have you done that's not been by the book that has been successful for you?
One of the biggest things was my first iteration of self-publishing school. We sold the course before we even built the course, which is definitely not by most business books. It's that's more of a lean startup type mentality where we had 44 students and we had 0 product. So I actually co-created the course alongside our students, and that was the whole pitch. I learned from one of my mentors, Dane Maxwell, where he said, hey, until people whip out their credit card and pay you for something, your idea is not validated. So don't spend all this time developing a product that no one wants. Get them to tell you what they want, then get them to pay for it, sell it to them, then build it, right? So that's what I did with self-publishing school. So we brought in $86,000 and we had 44 students and we had 0 product. And then I built it alongside them. And that's how we made sure that we built a program that was truly what people wanted. That's one thing that I feel like I've done by the book, that I haven't done by the book. Gosh, there's probably a lot of other things, some good, some bad, but that's the main one that sticks out to me.
When you were co-creating that first course with your students, was there any part of the process or part of the feedback that they were getting that surprised you along the way? Like things they wanted or didn't want that you were like, oh, I had no idea that was going to be the case.
Yeah, it's tough to remember everything, but I know it's always surprising. Like the things that you think people care about are often not the things that people care about. So what was interesting is I split it up into 2 groups. We had what we called our pro students and then our VIP students. And the VIP, that was 3,000 and the pro was 1,000. Okay. And for the VIP, I would do coaching calls every single week, 30-minute coaching calls for 12 weeks. So what ended up happening is I just told the VIP students, because they were usually 2 to 3 weeks ahead of the rest of the class, I just told them, I said, hey, any video that you could possibly want or need, tell me and I'll create it for you. Any challenge you have, any roadblock you run into, just tell me and I'll create a video for it and I'll help you out. And what would happen is I would record these videos for my VIP students, and then they were 2 weeks or so ahead. And so a week or so later, I just roll it out to the rest of the school. And so it's like they were telling me exactly what they wanted. So it took the guesswork out of it. So there was a lot of surprises in what they wanted. It wasn't exactly what I thought they would want. But then again, I didn't have a ton of preconceived notions. So I drifted out 1 week at a time over the course of 12 weeks. And they just told me what they wanted. And it's so simple, right? I could have guessed, but they told me. And then what was also surprising was places they would get hung up in the process. So I would be surprised that, how many people wouldn't finish their rough draft, or how many people wanted to do a title and a cover for their book before they even started writing the book, which is the way everyone thinks they need to do it, but it's not the way that you actually need to do it, because it's just going to slow you up. So there was a bunch of little things like that where it was surprising, but then we just built it into the course. So at the end of that 12-week process, I went into my creation, I went into my content cave. That's what I call it. And just kind of retooled everything. And then I took the weeks where people had a ton of questions, and I recorded videos addressing those questions. And that's kind of what we've continued to do since then, is that when we get a lot of questions on something, we'll just build that video or some sort of training into the program right at the point where people start to ask those questions. And so now it's kind of gotten to the point where people think we're reading their minds. It's like, wow, when I have a question, it gets answered in a video.
So Chandler, in what ways have you had to grow to achieve your biggest dream so far? Like grow personally?
So many ways, and mind, body, and spirit. I mean, you name it. There's a lot of ways that I've had to grow, but especially as a leader, that's been probably one of the biggest things. What ends up happening, so my company grew very fast. Obviously we went from, in February 2015, all of my bank accounts were negative, and I had borrowed $15,000 from friends and family. So if self-publishing school, if that launch didn't go well, I was screwed. I would have probably had to move back home. I was living in San Diego. I wouldn't be able to afford rent. It was really kind of a tough time. But out of that, I went from all my bank accounts to negative, $15,000 borrowed from friends and family, to we did a $1.32 million in business from February to December, or the end of December. So very fast growth. We started hiring pretty aggressively. And then obviously last year, which was 2016, we doubled revenue and tripled profits. And so we just kept hiring. It was a little bit too fast. So, you just learn lessons as a leader, you learn lessons as a CEO, and it kind of puts you in the pressure cooker where every single one of my employees is older than me. So that creates challenges in itself. There's leadership challenges. I've had to grow just as a person, my communication skills. As a CEO, how do I run the company? I've had to especially grow in finances and learn finances a lot more. I had a mentor that says accounting is the rules of the game. If you don't know the rules, you can't win the game, right? So you got to learn the rules and you got to figure out how to work the rules. And so I had to really go back and learn a lot about finances. There's just a lot of little skills like that I feel like I had to learn something to hit six figures. Then we hit six figures, and it's the whole what got you here won't get you there. And I had to learn more to get to seven figures, and then we hit seven figures, and everything started breaking. And then I had to learn more, and now we're on our way to eight figures, and it's okay. How do you manage 10 plus employees and communications and HR and all these new challenges that seem to spring up at every phase of growth?
How have you adapted to managing employees who are older than you? That seems like a really interesting challenge, and particularly, given the millennial focus of the podcast, a really relevant one to both employers and employees.
It's been interesting. It's something that I've kind of dealt with since I was in college. When I was in college, I ran a business with an internship called Student Painters. So the same type thing. I think I was, I want to say 18, maybe 17, 18, 19 in that range when I was first year running my business, and all my guys were older than me then. And so now it's a similar situation. I think people put too much stock in it, myself included. I initially thought like, oh my gosh, all these people are older than me. They're not going to trust me, and they're not going to let me lead them, and they're going to second guess my decisions. But it's just it's the voices in your head. Mm-hmm. So that's been the biggest learning for me, is getting over those voices, because there is some maturity in decision making. Like, that is valid. There's just certain things that, even a year ago, it's like, wow, that was my maturity level when I was making those decisions. That's not very good. And I could see why people, wouldn't trust that. But so there is a maturation process that has to happen. But above all else, I really think it's just having the confidence in yourself that you know what you're doing, and that it's not going to be an issue that you're managing people older than you. And then also just being open and communicating with people. I feel like for a while I had this, I'm a very good communicator, and I enjoy talking to people and making friends. And that's always been kind of one of my strengths. But for some reason, when it came to my team, it's like I was closed off, and I would communicate with them very differently. And I wouldn't connect with them the same way that I would just any regular person. And so I found that I had to just break through some limiting beliefs and some just weird stigmas there, where it's like, okay, I need to just treat these people like I know them and like they're my friends, and like ask them questions about their personal life, and just like I would anyone else. But this may not be the same for everyone else, but those were just kind of the things that I had to work through to hit that next level in managing people.
Well, I just want to say congratulations on the rapid growth that you're experiencing, both with your company and also internally, your personal growth. Sure. That's really wonderful. So when you look back, which of your accomplishments do you believe has surprised you the most?
This is a tricky one. For me, this might sound a little bit trivial, and hitting seven figures was a huge benchmark for me. I kind of predicted it in a Business Insider article at a time where I had no clue how I was going to hit it. So I'll give you two examples. So this is the first one, then probably the largest in the last little bit. I got interviewed for a Business Insider article, and it released in April of 2015. And I knew the only way I could get this article is if there was a sexy hook. Like, it had to be a good hook that would really just catch the journalist's attention and also catch people's attention for the article. And so the whole hook was college dropout starts business that's on track to do $1 million this year. That was the hook. And it was April of 2015. And I think we had done either $200,000 or $300,000 in business, something like that. I'm no mathematician, but you can do some quick math here and know that April is almost May. And May is basically the halfway point of the year. And we were, I want to say, at $200,000 or $250,000 in business. So we definitely weren't halfway. But we definitely weren't on track. Right? So I kind of made that prediction, and I had no clue how we were going to hit it. But I said, you know what? If I make this public, we're going to hit it. And so just to be able to finish out that year, we had this an incredible online event that went really well. And then that doubled our revenue for the whole year in 1 month. And that was the month of July. So we did like $300,000 in 1 month, which is double what we had done all year. And so then we started to say, oh, wow, this is within reach. And then we had a strong finish to the year, and we finished out and reached that 1.32 million in sales. And it was like, man, this is crazy. I didn't even think this was possible. So that's one example. The second example is, this is probably the one that sticks out the most, is I had a goal in student painters when I was a rookie manager, which was my freshman year in college, to be number one in the country and number one in the company for all managers my first year. And the trials and tribulations over that 7 months, I thought it was going to be a walk in the park, because I just, business wise, like growing up, I just never met anyone who was better than me. That's not to be arrogant or anything. It's just like, I'm from a pretty small town. And so when it came to business, it was just kind of like, that's my thing. And I couldn't find anyone as motivated as me or that would give me a run for my money. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to join Student Painters and I'll be number one in the country. And that's that. I didn't really think it was going to be that hard. And then I get in there and I'm like, man, these guys are actually really good. And some of them have ran this their second or third year. And some of them, they're, a junior or a senior, and, all these things. And I'm like, man, this is pretty tough. And so just at the end of that year, I ended up getting number one in the company, number one in the country, and breaking six figures for the first time ever. And I want to say I was, 18, 19 at the time. So that was just a huge accomplishment for me. And I just remember being on the cruise, which they do this rewards cruise at the end of every year. And I just remember being on the top deck of the cruise, holding that award, just looking out all over the ocean and thinking to myself, man, I didn't think this was possible. There were days and times during that summer where I just hit rock bottom. I mean, I really hit rock bottom, and I was living away from home, eating crappy food. Like mom wasn't cooking me meals because I'm away from home. And, just I had almost my whole team quit one day. And I just remember thinking, man, this isn't possible anymore. And I gave up hope almost. And then just to be able to fast forward to the end of that and just stand on the top deck of that cruise and say, you know what? I didn't think this was possible, and it just happened. Like, what else in my life is possible that I'm not giving myself a shot at? And it really just kind of challenged me. And I remember just reflecting and just thinking, man, this is very symbolic of what else I can accomplish. And so I started to look around and see, like, where else am I selling myself short?
Speaking of some of those struggles, what's the most significant challenge you faced so far, and what has it been like to overcome it?
By far the most significant challenge that I faced, there's two that come to mind. One is last year I showed up to my company retreat, and I found out from one of my employees that my business partner was trying to kick me out of my business, kick me out of the business, and he was trying to basically take over. So we had to go through mediation for a month and negotiate a buyout, and end up buying him out. And that was pretty challenging, because here's my baby, my company, this thing that I've worked for years on, slaving away at it, and this might just be ripped out from under me, right? So that was pretty tough. But that really doesn't hold the candle to the most difficult situation I've encountered in my life, which was, so I just told you about the Student Painters cruise. I went back the next year and I trained 3 guys, and they all made the cruise. They all did really well. They ran their businesses through Student Painters. And then I went back the third year, and I wasn't even with the company anymore, but I just loved the company and just wanted to be with my guys. So I just paid my way onto the cruise and said, hey, can I come? And they said yes. So I came onto the cruise, and the very last night of the cruise, we were on the kind of it's the mast at the front of the ship. We were on top, like not on top, but we climbed up that thing. This is it's technically an area of the boat that you're not supposed to be on, but it's a place where we just go up there every single year. And it's kind of symbolic, we're on top of the world because we're the top performers for the company. So let's go to the highest place of the ship. So I'm up there, and there's 5 of us up there, and I'm talking to some friends, And then I hear something, and I turn and look to my left, and it's the radar thing. It starts to spin. It turns on and starts to spin. And about that time, I look to my left, and it just sweeps across, boom, hits my buddy Kendall in the chest. And at that point, it hits him in the chest, and it throws him over the railing. Now I look over, and I see him fall 2 stories, and he lands on his head. And at that point, I'm thinking he can't be that hurt. Maybe he'll just hop up. But I looked down and he wasn't moving. And it was about that time that my buddy Christian, he kind of yelled out and he said, "Somebody get some help." And he just yelled it out. And that's when I realized it was serious. And I scaled down the thing, get down there to Kendall. He's not moving. He's unconscious, and I'm trying to get him coherent. We call the medics and the paramedics on the ship. They come out. They rush him down into the little hospital area on the boat. Then they rush the boat into port, and they rush him off the ship. When they rush him off the ship, on the way to the hospital, he passes away. And it was about this time that, I just found out that he passed away, and I turned my phone on as we're coming into port, and I found out that my grandma had also passed away. I started getting all these texts and found out that my grandma had passed away that weekend. And that was kind of like a punch in the stomach for sure. And I never lost someone that was, that was a friend of mine, especially in such a traumatic fashion right in front of me. And so I remember that like it was yesterday. And that was by far the most difficult. It's the biggest challenge that I feel like I've ever faced in my life. It made me want to give up. I felt guilty because it was my idea to go up on top of the ship, and something that we did every year, but it was my idea to do it this time. Right. And so I felt guilty, that I shouldn't have done that and all these things. And I just remember talking with Kendall's dad, and he said, Kendall, he was my only son. He was the family name. I'm old. I can't have more kids. He said, the only good that can come out of this is if other people's lives are positively impacted by this. And when he said that, that kind of just hit me right in the heart. And I said, you know what? It's my responsibility to make sure that some good comes out of this. So that was kind of, when I heard him say that, I said, okay, well, it's on my shoulders now. And so ever since then, that happened in October of 2014. 3 or 4 months later, in February, we launched Self-Publishing School, and that kind of was a big part and continues to be a big part of what drives me and motivates me to do bigger, better things, is just really to make him proud.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's such a powerful and charged story, and what a tribute to Kendall and, to your own family and to his family, to have that tragedy become a generator for something positive that does help people express themselves and fulfill their own dreams while they are still here. And I think it's such a challenging but an important reminder that we don't know how long we have on this earth, and thank you for sharing that. It's a really moving story.
Yeah, no problem.
So shifting a little bit, what advice would you give to other millennials who are on a journey toward fulfillment and success?
Yeah, there's a couple pieces of advice that I would give. Number one is just kind of work at it. You got to be willing to put in the time and put in the effort. So many people, I think, they look at success and they just want everything tomorrow. And they want the quick fix. They want the get rich quick kind of thing. And it really is going to take work. That's the first thing that I would say. It's going to take work, and it's going to take a lot more work than you think it's going to take. So you really need to dedicate yourself to that. It's the one thing you can control is effort. That quote's always stuck with me. It's the one input that you can control is effort. I believe that, growing up, my parents met in a factory. I didn't have any special, I didn't have a special education. I didn't have a silver spoon or anything like that given to me. But the one thing I always had, and this is credit to my parents, is a ridiculous work ethic. I can outwork anybody, whether it's in sports, whether it's in business or whatever the thing is. I will start off worse than the majority of people most of the time. But by the time it's all said and done, I'll be the best and I'll rise to the top just because I'll put in more time, more effort than anyone else. So that's my first piece of advice is don't be afraid to work. And the second piece of advice is don't be afraid to fail. We have a core value in my company. It's fail forward, fail fast, fail often. It's one of our 5 core values. We call it the SPS way, self-publishing school, my company. Fail fast, fail forward, fail often. And I believe that nothing good is accomplished without failure. So you have to embrace it and you have to just be prepared to fail. And the most successful people that I've seen, they recognize that failure is just an opportunity to learn. Because if you're not failing, you're probably not trying enough. You're not risking enough. And you're not putting yourself out there. So you have to be willing to fail. And you're going to fail a lot. A lot of people are worried about failure, and they're worried if they're going to fail. And I tell people in our program this all the time about their book. Don't worry. I can just go ahead and guarantee you're going to fail. So I know you're worried. You don't know if you're going to fail, but I'll just pull that worry away because I can practically guarantee it. So now you can stop worrying about failing and look forward to it, because that's going to be the time that you're really going to learn.
So what do you consider failure? There's like a scale in my mind of failure, like, oh, this Facebook ad campaign didn't work the way I thought it to, versus, I don't know, the apocalypse or something. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but so I'm wondering, what do you mean when you say failure?
Well, I think there's 2 definitions that I would hold. One is the common definition and one is my definition. So for most people, failure means when something doesn't quite match up with your expectations. So you had an expectations for something to be X amount successful. For most people, failure is, I want this outcome, I expect this outcome, and I don't hit that. Now, there can be any measurement. You could come up just short, but most of the time it's you really fail and you don't quite hit that outcome. Now, that's what most people consider as failure. And that's what, when I feel like I failed at something, it's a result of that. The results don't match my expectations. Simple as that. Mm-hmm. But what I would view as failure is when people have failure and they give up. It's not a failure until you actually give up. That's the only definition of failure that I have, is when you stop trying or when you give up on something because you first have failed. So there's a difference between failing and being a failure, or having something be a failure. It's kind of like they say in the stock market, you can't lose money if you don't sell your stocks. Mm-hmm. Like the only time you lose is when you sell. That might be a bit ridiculous, but that's my firm belief, is that you can't be a failure or you can't have a failure unless you give up. But you certainly can fail and you can learn from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like when you say, hey, you're definitely going to fail, you're speaking to their common conception of what failure means. So meaning it's likely you're not going to hit every expectation that you have about what this process is going to be like. But you're saying giving up and quitting entirely is what that like true failure is.
100%. And I would tell you, the only last thing that I would add to that is there's a difference between you failing and you being a failure. And most people can't separate that distinction. They think that if they fail, they are all of a sudden a failure. And that's the takeaway, is that you are not a failure because you have failed at something.
Yeah, which I think is important. I mean, we talk with students about the growth mindset, and that's exactly the message, is that it's about the effort you put in. It's about learning when things don't go right. In fact, when things aren't going perfectly, that's a good indicator of where you need to focus and where the growth is coming. Mm-hmm. And so, it's always a balance, right? Like you want to play strengths-based learning, and strengths-based activity in business is always really important too. But failure is inevitable, as you're saying, and separating the identity piece from it, I think, is also really important for people's mental health, because I know, and you do too, Chandler, especially from being an entrepreneur, that there's so much wrapped up when you feel like, in a way, you are your business, or you feel like you are the product in some form, then it's so easy to say, oh, people don't like this, they don't like me. And that can definitely have that downward spiral. And I'm wondering along the process, because, anything that you're doing that's on a larger scale as you are, I'm sure like there has been things that haven't worked, but also, people have said things that are unflattering. How do you mentally stay afloat and be the person you want to be for your team and for your customers? How do you maintain that for yourself?
Oh, that's tough. That's way easier said than done. Yeah, I've gotten my fair share of 1-star reviews on my book. I've had people refund self-publishing school. I've had people create blog posts to warn others that the program sucks and that is no good. And it's so tough to see those and just not instantly go into rage mode. Which, like, every time I see it, I just get so pissed. Like, I'm so mad, and I start to question, like, oh man, does the program suck? Am I a horrible person? It's like one of the best pieces of advice or just guidance I got on this was early on. I remember getting my first 1-star review on a book, and I was traveling in Europe with my family at the time, and I was with my brother. And my brother's a musician. He plays in a rock and roll band called Need to Breathe. So pretty well-known band. They just released their 6th album with Atlantic, debuted at #1 on the Billboard chart. So he's been around the game for a while and has had a good amount of success. And I just remember looking over to him, and I'm looking at this review, and I'm like, man, this sucks. Like, this person just trashed me. I think at the end of the review it said, and the worst part is I bought it on my Kindle, so I can't even use the book as a doorstop because that would be the only thing that this book is worth is my door open.
Dang.
And I remember reading that and I'm like, oh man, this is rough. And I just looked at him and I was just telling my family and I was super down. And he's like, hey man, you are not your product. You are not your creation. There's a difference. There's a huge difference. So when someone doesn't like my song, doesn't mean they don't like me. When someone doesn't like your book, doesn't mean they don't like you. You have to separate from what you've created because if you don't separate that identity, if you don't have self-worth and confidence in yourself, then you will forever be worrying about these people who bash it. And because the fact is, if you're doing anything of significance, like you said, Blake, you're doing anything of significance and anything of scale, you're going to piss a lot of people off and you're going to have people who aren't happy. Either A, that you're successful or they just don't like your product. It's just the nature of the game. And so that really helped is just to disconnect my identity from the thing that I've created. And then it also helped to build up my self-worth. It's something that I didn't have a lot of for a long time. And I would especially recommend, it's an audiobook by Jack Canfield called Maximum Confidence. I've listened to that thing, at least 4, if not 5 times in the last 9 to 12 months. And I'll probably listen to it another 3 or 4 times over this next year. It just really, really helped boost my self-confidence, which helps with things like this.
So you've shared a couple of quotes and just now this audiobook, but is there another that you would like to share that changed the direction of your life?
2 quotes I'll share. One is, don't take advice from someone you wouldn't gladly switch places with.
That's so interesting. Do tell.
So if I have a business mentor and he's been divorced 4 times and his kids hate him, I'm going to take some of his advice with a grain of salt because I would not switch places with him. Family is very important to me. My future family is very important to me. So I would take some of his advice with a grain of salt. So don't take advice from someone you wouldn't gladly switch places with, or at least take it with a grain of salt. So if I'm trying to scale a $100 million company and I'm talking to a lifestyle entrepreneur who's built a few $1 million a year business, well, I'm going to take their advice with a grain of salt because I'm not trying to switch places with them. So that's the first piece of advice I give. And then the second one is so lame, and it's probably been told so many times. I lived my whole life by this, or not my whole life, but the last 5 to 10 years, which is when I've had more success than I've ever had. And that's, you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. It's the Jim Rohn quote. Probably 90% of people listening to this have heard this, but I would really challenge you to ask yourself, are you utilizing this in your life? Like, what are you actually doing with that piece of information? And could you list out 5 people after this interview is over? List out 5 people that are your closest friends, and would you be happy with that list? I've been very intentional about surrounding myself with smart people. I moved across the country to Des Moines, Iowa, then to San Diego, and now to San Francisco, all because of that principle. I've created entrepreneur houses where there was 5 of us all running online businesses, living in one house, challenging each other, things like that. So I've been really, really intentional about surrounding myself and picking friends and picking acquaintances that really challenge me on a daily basis. And I think it's the most important quote that's led to the most success for me.
Well, thank you for sharing those. And I love the application of the latter one because, as you say, it is frequently quoted but rarely implemented.
Yes.
And one more I wanted to add, actually, was something that you told me the last time we met up, and it's really stuck with me. You had a metaphor, and you said and I'm going to, please correct me if I'm paraphrasing this incorrectly, but you said essentially, imagine you're on an island and there's another island within sight range. And when you're building products or art or anything that you're creating, you start building a bridge to the other island. And if you only get halfway across and then you stop and you go and try to build another bridge and get halfway across and stop, you never reach the other island, which is sort of the metaphor of success or, and so it's really stuck with me because I think as millennials, especially, there is this desire for that instant success and, I've been working hard at it for 6 months or for a year. Why isn't it working perfectly and making $1 million already? Which isn't to say you can't use efficiencies and scale, but I really love that image. And I was just wondering if there have been some moments in your own life or one moment specifically that you think of where you made that commitment to finish one of the bridges before starting on the next one that's really helped you.
Oh gosh, yeah, that half-built bridges principle is one that I talk about a lot, and has been really helpful for me and for a lot of other people. And the specific thing that comes to mind is when I started self-publishing school, we were also doing a productivity course, and I remember talking to my business partner at the time, and I just remember saying, "Hey, man, this productivity course is not selling like we want it to. Self-publishing school is. We need to ditch this productivity course, like fully just cancel it. Don't even put any more effort to it." And I just remember him being like, "Well, no, we can keep it going. We can see, it'll catch on." And I'm like, "No, we're not doing it. We're going 100% at self-publishing school, and we're going to make that successful." And that's one of the best decisions I ever made, is just said, "Hey, nothing else matters. I'm diving into self-publishing school." And it's a decision that I have to continually make because I'm 2 years into it. And we've had a lot of opportunities to start other businesses. I've had opportunities to start other business, to offer a ton of other products and services, but I just have to keep saying no and remind myself that this is our core competency. I'm going to keep building this bridge and expanding this bridge because this bridge is going to bring a lot of money and a lot of success.
At what point would you consider doing other ventures? Like, at what point is the bridge complete?
For me, I make decisions based on learning, not based on money. So for me, it's when I've gotten 80% of the learning out of the opportunity. That's when I take a look at other opportunities. The way I look at that for this business is to get it to at least 10 million a year. That's when I feel like I will have captured 80% of the learning from this opportunity. And then I can take a look at hiring a CEO to run this company and starting another company. That's what I would look at. But then there's milestones in between where once I get $1 million or $2 million in the bank, then I'm going to start looking at investing in real estate and in other companies. And so it won't necessarily I won't be splitting my attention, but I will be dividing up my resources so I can have my money working for me.
That's a great perspective. Chandler, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Would you share with our audience where they can find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, sure. So the main place to find me is self-publishingschool.com. The self-publishingschool.com, and that's the main site where we house everything that we do at Self-Publishing School. And there's one particular resource. We didn't get to talk a ton about, book writing or anything like that, but if you've ever thought about writing a book, we've got a really good post on there. It's called How to Self-Publish a Book in 2017, and we can link that up. And that's like kind of a starter pack, if you will, for like starting to learn this sort of thing. So those are two good resources that could be helpful for people.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll put those in the show notes. And I also hope that people see one of your Facebook ads at some point, because it really makes me happy as I'm scrolling through my feed and I just have you waving at me, telling me to turn on my sound.
Yes.
Has that one been working well for you, I'm guessing, considering how often I see it?
Yeah, it is. For the month of January, we just did about a little bit over a 3-to-1 return on those. So
wow, congratulations.
That's working pretty well, and we're just getting started. We're still testing a lot of that stuff. So yeah, it works well.
Awesome. Well, Chandler, thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
The Motivational Millennial podcast is supported by Motivational Millennial Coaching Services. We help you find clarity and confidence so you can take action toward living your dream life. To learn more about one-on-one personalized support from someone who believes you have a path to fulfillment and wants to help you uncover it, visit www.motivationalmillennial.com/coaching.
Hello and welcome to the after show of our conversation with Chandler Bolt. One of the ideas I really like that Chandler brought up is this idea that the only thing you can really control in this world is your effort. And I thought how true that rang and also how challenging that is. Mm-hmm. Because on one hand, it's objectively true. I mean, we can influence a lot of things around us. And in fact, the more we feel we're capable of influencing, often the more effort we take. And the more effort we make, the more actions we take to create that influence in the world that we want to see. But we can't control the outcome. And so it's a good reminder for me because sometimes I doubt and underestimate my own power. And on the flip side, it can be really challenging to say, my effort's the only thing I can control, and I'm not doing a good enough job, or I don't feel like I have the willpower or motivation to do what I'm trying to do right now. And I find myself often being very self-critical in those moments. So how do you deal, Ivy, with with that tension between knowing that the only thing you can truly control is your effort, but sometimes it doesn't even feel like you can control your effort because of other pressures or how our mind state is in a given moment? How do you deal with that?
Sometimes I don't. Let's just be totally honest about that. Like sometimes there's days where, yeah, this is a really good point because I think for some of us, we all have saboteurs. We all have inner critic. You know, Chandler mentioned having those moments. Like we all have those challenging internal moments, which is part of the reason we have this podcast, right? Because we're highlighting that and the reality that the journey, if even from the outside, it may seem super polished and perfect and great when you're looking at someone else's life and someone else's experience. But in reality, the journey is more challenging than you think will be. And I think also there's something to be said for the fact that some of us, myself included, have an additional mental health layer to the saboteur and inner critic that, you know, is genetic or other things that can't really be seen, but that it results in anxiety and depression that can sometimes be so overwhelming that effort, like a win, is getting out of bed that day. I've had days like that. And so it's interesting. I just notice that the more I have focused on healing, self-compassion, self-love, the less that I have the sort of debilitating anxiety moments, and therefore my capacity is increased, my effort is increased. So when I have those days where I wake up and I'm peaceful, I don't jump onto my phone immediately, okay, because that's anxiety inducing. Just do not do that. Like, don't get on Facebook immediately or email or whatever. Just get up, you know, have a shower, have some coffee and breakfast, and just ease into the day. I don't have to worry about making effort happen. Effort happens, and I am productive, and it comes with ease. So it's hard. Like it's just sometimes, you know, there's anxiety, and it's just about being self-compassionate in those moments. And I really valued listening to Chandler and his amazing perspective.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I agree. I think when you look at that idea that the only thing you can control is your effort as an empowering statement versus a judging statement,
right?
That's where it really resonates with me and helps me take more action and be more powerful in my own capacity and expand and grow that capacity, instead of saying, look, dude, the only thing you control is your effort and you're not doing very much right now, so you're not worth very much, so therefore,
right.
you're not enough.
Yeah. And what I loved about listening to Chandler is that, for some of us, like, we all have natural abilities and talents and things that come easy to us that we take for granted. For me, it's listening. Listening is one of those things that I'm complimented on a lot, and I'm not consciously thinking that's part of who I am, is being present with people. And so it sounds like when you're listening to Chandler, one of the things that comes easy for him, part of it is because it was the way he was raised, and part of it is probably his natural ability, is effort and hard work. That's what he said. And I envy, I admire is a much more accurate phrase. I admire that about him a lot. I find it inspirational because, when you hear someone talk about something that they're really passionate about and that comes easy to them, that's invigorating. And I love that one of the things that comes easy to him is just killing the scene, just getting it done. And so I'm listening to him and I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And I'm so happy for him that he experiences life in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had to really reframe that for myself recently, because I think I was using that idea of the 24/7 grind. You just got to be the most hustler out there, which is again one of the things that Chandler does so well.
Yeah, so cool.
And people like Gary Vaynerchuk or Grant Cardone are definitely advocates of that. But I found what I was doing, I was stressing myself out so much about how I wasn't living up fully to that ideal, that I didn't ever let myself get in the space where I could just do whatever the max I was able to do, because, to your point about the inner critic, I had this extra layer of judgment on top of me. You're trying to hustle right now, but you're not doing as much as Gary Vaynerchuk thinks you should do. So it is cool to see how Chandler has really embraced that part of his identity.
Yeah.
What else did you enjoy from the conversation with Chandler?
So the image that really stuck with and resonated with me was when he was talking about an accomplishment that surprised him. And he was talking about the first time that he had earned his way onto this cruise and had the award in his hand and was standing out on the deck or, wherever outside. And I picture him in that moment, and he was thinking, and I'm paraphrasing this, but if I can accomplish this, what else am I capable of? And what else am I holding myself back from accomplishing? And I think that really struck me because, gosh, don't we all experience holding ourselves back from things? Don't we all experience quitting before we even started? I mean, that's a lot of it, actually, in just many forms. Telling ourselves we're not good enough, or we're too young, we're too old, any of those sorts of things. And so it was just so wonderful to be sharing in that experience of someone getting to have such a profound moment of realization after so much hard work and perseverance and just sticking with it and just going and going and going, and to actually have him succeed in that moment. I mean, what an amazing and wonderful gift for him in his life, because I imagine that it continued to fuel him having that result, because you and I are both firm believers in effort, right? In perseverance, in continuing in the face of heartbreak and challenge as you move forward on your path and all the change and transformation that will occur. But the exact form of success that you envision isn't an inevitability, even with the effort and the perseverance. And that's what you were kind of talking about earlier, is that sometimes you work really hard and things may not turn out in the way that you expect they do. And so having that kind of a win that was like exactly what he wanted and exactly what he like had envisioned for himself at such a young age is wonderful and inspiring to me, and makes me think about what's possible for me, you know? Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's just so inspiring.
Yeah, there's a great point too about the resourcefulness when you're faced with a vision that is challenging, that forces you to grow as well. Like when he did the interview and said, my company's on track to do $1 million this year, even though it was almost halfway through the year and they, were about a quarter of the way towards that goal. And
he had that experience in the back of his mind to like work from. Like, I'm going to be the number one manager in the company, in the country, and this is going to happen. And then he made it happen. So like having that experience is so profound.
Yeah, exactly. And so then when he took it to self-publishing school in that first year, he knew it was possible because he had already had this major accomplishment that you're describing. And then he had to get creative, the current trajectory doesn't get us quite to where we need to be. So in his case, they put on an event, which jumped them, much closer to that goal. So I like the idea too that sometimes being stretched in a healthy way helps you think of what else could I do that could be creative, that could help accomplish it. And, one example from what we've been doing recently is we knew there was a great opportunity at a school district nearby who was very interested in the growth mindset. And so rather than stressing out, which I had been doing about, we got to put together this whole national campaign and the demo video needs to be updated and I need to add this to the website, I was like, okay, I'm just going to send out these 30 emails. And sure enough, boom, 5 schools sign up and they want to do in this case, the growth mindset assembly. And it was great. And it was a good example of setting that vision, that intention. We can serve these people and here's something that they want. How can we let them know about it in a way that's really authentic? And if they say no, that's fine. But if they say yes, then fantastic. We've provided value.
And so now that you've had that win, how will you use that win in the future to continue and persevere?
Yeah, well, I think expanding and continuing the strategy in this case for me is really important because there's that momentum of we know it works. We've just proved it can work. And so often I doubt myself. Like that's the biggest challenge. And so to answer your question, it's that constant reminder of look back on your wins. Look what you just did. Keep going, keep going, keep going.
And trusting yourself.
That's right. That's right. You have the capability. And so it's just combining it with the effort to bring it full circle.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important that we take time to look at how far we've come instead of always focusing on how far we have to go. I think there's a good balance between vision and really appreciating what we have accomplished, even those small wins, and not just getting a small win and then going, okay, great. That feeds my self-worth for a little bit. It puts a little bit of self-worth, the fuel on the fire. And then eventually that'll burn out because I'm not doing good enough for, how does that become like a permanent part? I don't want to imply that your self-worth or self-identity should only be tied to like what you accomplish, because that's not really accurate either. But it's to your point of what's underneath the strategy, right? So you don't want to tie the lesson just to, okay, the strategy works really well, let's continue it. But tying it to, I can trust myself, because that is something that you can use in any situation. And that also brings in more self-love and self-compassion and natural self-worth because you are learning to trust yourself in that moment.
Yeah. And the key that you're pointing out is learning to do that even before there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that you could physically point to prove it. Because with speaking, I feel like I can look at it and say, oh yeah, I've given, 100 speeches, like they've gone really well, or freestyle rapping. I've done hundreds of freestyles. I know they will go well, but how can I look at something, that's newer, like these new workshops we're working on, and say, you know what? I trust myself, that I care about people. I think strategically and critically about the content. I have a great partner here who's going to help design it with me, and how can we trust that process?
Yeah. Oh, great.
Awesome.
Thanks for having a great debrief with me today.
Yeah, thank you. And
thanks for listening.
Yes, our amazing podcast audience. We hope that you have a great week, and we think of all the places you will go and all the awesome things you have done. And we just cheer you on and look forward to talking with you next week. We have a free gift for you, hot off the virtual presses. If you go to motivationalmillennial.com/free gift, you can get your very own personal transformation guide that illustrates the 4 limiting beliefs that we commonly have as millennials and 8 motivational tools to overcome them. So go to motivationalmillennial.com. That's millennial, MILLENNIAL.com/free gift. For show notes and upcoming guests, or to learn more about Coactive Coaching, the blog, and our other awesome offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com. Keep in touch with us at facebook.com/motivationalmillennial.
We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email with your thoughts, comments, and suggestions at podcast@motivationalmillennial.com. And tell us who you might like to hear from, or if you think you or anyone you know would be good for the show.
The Motivational Millennial Podcast is edited by Christy Hostler and Team Podcast.
Our theme music was composed and performed by Blake Brandis.
Have a great week, Motivational Millennials!